scene opens with a stark, empty Jallianwala Bagh. Silence hangs heavy. They say history is written by the victors. But what happens when the victors try to bury the truth? What happens when a nation's most brutal act of violence is not just downplayed but actively obscured? Today, we're going back to Amritsar, April 13th, 1919. We're going to talk about Jallianwala Bagh, and we're going to talk about the facts the British Empire, never wanted you to know. Imagine this: you're a proud Indian citizen, a civilian. Your children are with you. You've come to Jallianwala Bagh, a peaceful public garden, for a festival, Vaisakhi, a day of celebration. Suddenly, your world erupts in chaos and terror, not from an invading army but from your own government, your own rulers. This wasn't a battle, this was a massacre, and it was ordered. We're not talking about a few stray bullets. We are talking about hundreds, perhaps thousands, of innocent lives extinguished in cold blood. We're talking about an act so horrific, so devoid of humanity, that it still echoes through history, shrouded in euphemism and denial. But the truth, as it always does, has a way of surfacing. And the truth about Jallianwala Bagh is far more damning than you might have been told. Let's start with the context. India was under British rule. The First World War had just ended, and Britain, with India's significant contribution in men and resources, had emerged victorious. Yet, instead of rewarding India with greater autonomy or even fulfilling promises of political reform, the British government, under the Viceroy Lord Chelmsford, introduced the Rowlatt Acts in March 1919. These were draconian laws that essentially suspended civil liberties, allowing for detention without trial, and severely restricting press freedom and public assembly. They were designed to crush any nascent Indian nationalism, any whisper of dissent. Gandhi himself called them an introduction to a reign of terror. The Indian people reacted with outrage. Protests erupted across the country. In Amritsar on April 10, 1919, tensions were already high. Two prominent nationalist leaders, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, were arrested and deported by the British authorities. This sparked widespread demonstrations, and tragically, in the ensuing unrest, 5 Europeans were killed. This was not condoned by the nationalist leaders, and indeed, Gandhi himself condemned the violence. But for the British administration, it was the pretext they needed. A justification, however flimsy, for a brutal crackdown. Now enter Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, a man who, in his own words, believed his duty was to teach the Indians a lesson they would never forget. He was the acting brigadier general commanding the Amritsar area and the officer commanding the Jallianwala Brigade. On April 11th, he banned all public gatherings in Amritsar. On April 12th, he reinforced this order. The message was clear: no more protests, no more assembly. Then came April 13th, Vaisakhi, a sacred day and a time for people to gather. Many residents of Amritsar, unaware of the stringent ban or simply believing it wouldn't apply to a religious festival in a public park, converged on Jallianwala Bagh. It's a walled enclosure with narrow entrances, making it a virtual trap, a perfect place for a massacre. Dyer, alerted to the gathering, made a fateful decision. He assembled his troops, mostly Gurkha, Baluchi, and Punjabi soldiers, armed with rifles. He marched them to the bog, not to disperse the crowd peacefully, but to unleash hell. Here's the horrifying truth. Dyer and his men arrived at the bog around 5:30 p.m. The crowd, estimated to be between 10,000 and 20,000 people, was unarmed. There were women, children, the elderly, families celebrating a religious holiday. Dyer immediately ordered his troops to open fire. And they fired, not for minutes but for over 10 minutes, perhaps as long as 15. They fired relentlessly into a dense, trapped crowd. The soldiers initially targeted the most densely packed areas. The bullets tore through flesh, shattered bones, and turned a joyous festival into a scene of unimaginable carnage. This was not an act of self-defense. There was no imminent threat to the soldiers. Dyer himself admitted that his troops had enough ammunition to continue firing for much longer, but they ran out of bullets. He stated he could have brought out an armored car with a machine gun, but the entrance to the bog was too narrow. So he chose to abandon that potentially more effective method by machine gun and instead used rifle fire, which was still devastating. What's more, after the firing stopped, Dyer didn't offer any medical assistance. He didn't call for ambulances. He didn't even allow the injured to be tended to. Instead, he ordered his troops to march back, leaving hundreds of bleeding, dying, and dead bodies lying in the garden. The gates remained shut, preventing anyone from escaping. It was a deliberate act of abandonment, a further layer of cruelty to an already unspeakable atrocity. The official British inquiry, the Hunter Committee, which was formed to investigate the events, later reported 379 deaths and 1,200 injured. But many historians believe these numbers are a gross understatement. Local estimates and eyewitness accounts suggest the death toll could have been significantly higher, perhaps even exceeding 1,000. The British government, in their own inquiry, acknowledged Dyer's actions were an error of judgment and an unfortunate incident. An error of judgment that killed hundreds of unarmed civilians. And how did the British establishment react to Dyer? Not with condemnation, not with outrage, but with a chilling defense of his actions. When the report came out, there was a backlash, yes, but not from the highest echelons of the government. In fact, a significant section of the British public and the British press saw Dyer as a hero, a man who had bravely suppressed a rebellion. He was hailed as the savior of Amritsar by some. The House of Commons debated his actions, and while he was eventually dismissed from service, many felt that was insufficient punishment. A fund was even set up by his supporters to aid his family, further solidifying his image as a victim of unfair criticism for doing what was deemed necessary by some. This is where the facts they don't tell you become crucial. They don't tell you about the sheer, cold-blooded calculation. Dyer wasn't acting in a panic. He had time to think. He chose to shoot. They don't tell you about the deliberate prevention of medical aid. This wasn't just shooting people. It was leaving them to die. They don't tell you about the widespread support Dyer received from some quarters of British society. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It exposed a deep-seated prejudice and a belief in the empire's right to subjugate. They don't tell you about the impact this had on the Indian psyche. It was a watershed moment. It shattered any remaining illusions about British benevolence. It galvanized the Indian freedom movement and fueled a deep-seated resentment that would ultimately contribute to the end of British rule. Gandhi himself said that the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, more than any other event, solidified his resolve to achieve Purna Swaraj, complete independence. Think about it. The British Empire, which preached law and order, civilization and justice, committed this atrocity in the heart of a civilian population on a day of religious observance. They used the guise of maintaining order to perpetrate a massacre. And then, they tried to sanitize it, to minimize it, to make it an inconvenience rather than a crime. We are told about the British Raj, about its progress and its development, but the blood of thousands of innocent Indians stains that narrative. Jallianwala Bagh is not just a garden, it is a scar on the conscience of a nation and an empire. It is a stark reminder of the brutal realities of colonialism, of the price paid for empire. The next time you hear about the benevolence of the British Empire or the civilizing mission, remember Jallianwala Bagh. Remember the unarmed civilians, the trapped garden, and the relentless firing. Remember that history, when told by the victors, can be a carefully constructed lie. But the truth, however painful, always finds its way to the light. And the light on Jallianwala Bagh reveals a darkness that can never be truly extinguished. So the question remains, when will we truly confront the unspeakable? Scene fades to black.